Welcome back to a closer in-depth look at RWBY's villains. This is the final and fourth part of a series of videos, so I recommend checking those out after this video if you haven't seen them yet. We've gone into a deeper look at all of the villains so far, with the exception of one, the big bad boss of the show, Salem. Let's not waste any more time, let's look at what makes RWBY's villains so bad. Salem, the Wicked Witch. Our first introduction to her was actually the opening narration to the entire show. Where we thought they got Jen Taylor to just be a narrator, she's actually the main villain of the entire series. And honestly, I don't think the twist was very well handled. While I was really caught off guard to discover our narrator had been the final boss this whole time, I don't really think it's a good idea to wait until the end of the third volume to introduce her to us. I feel like we should have had a better idea on who our heroes would be facing in the long run, and waiting so long to actually introduce her to us meant we spent the first 3 years of the show only knowing about Cinder's faction. I feel they could have alleviated this problem while keeping the twist by having her narration more prominent in the first 3 volumes. Rather than only having her narration at the beginning of Volume 1 and the end of Volume 3, let her and Oz continue their narrative conversation at the beginning and end of every volume. Let us think the narrator is her own character before revealing her as the true villain. Aside from that, her introduction to the series was a major positive development in my mind. Cinder could be considered Team RWBY's biggest adversary, but I don't find her all that threatening or compelling. Salem picks up that slack where Cinder falls. Get it? Salem is terrifying just by her design alone. Upon her introduction in Volume 4, she seemed like a fascinating villain. She's not constantly threatening her subordinates, she's not controlling them out of fear, she's like a mother to them. She speaks softly and gives encouragement to them. When Tyrion returns after failing at his mission, she doesn't beat him or anything, she sounds like a disappointed mother. I love this idea. Having followers due to love and affection is a fascinating trait most villains don't have in media. They're usually always just a powerful, threatening presence. People follow their command out of fear of being killed, or because they're just equally as brutal. Salem's motherly love is a good parallel to Ozpin's personality. Oz has also acted somewhat like a father figure, specifically to Team RWBY. But Oz also has the tendency to use fear to manipulate his followers. I've noticed Ozpin will use the Grimm to avoid telling people things. He refuses to explain certain aspects of his character or their mission by saying, "We don't want to cause a panic. We can't let our negative emotions attract the Grimm." It's actually kind of manipulative behavior, and the fact that Salem doesn't use those kind of tactics with her followers is fascinating. Of course, you could make the argument Salem's motherly love can be manipulative in its own way, taking advantage of these lost souls she's come across. While I love this aspect of Salem's character, unfortunately, in recent volumes, I don't think it's that accurate anymore. Volume 5, she continued her caring attitude with her direct followers, but she was a totally different person with Leo. She insisted on threatening him constantly, and I don't get why. She basically tells Cinder she's using fear to control Leo due to his cowardly nature. But if she kept up her caring personality with Leo, he would have probably been even more loyal to her. Act as a safe haven for his cowardice. His constant fear and paranoia would mean he would be wholly devoted to Salem if she was like a pillar of safety and comfort for him. Because being a threatening force would keep him in line, but what would happen if Leo came across someone who he thought could actually beat Salem? He has no true loyalty to her, he would just follow the person who has the most brute strength, the person who could kill him or his enemies. Salem's aggressive personality shift seemed odd, but it got even worse in Volume 6. Where Tyrion failing at his mission resulted in Salem scolding him like a disappointed mother, Hazel's failure results in Grimm arms holding him down, covering his mouth and nose. She screams and flips tables. She's a completely different person. Salem's mood swing feels like it came out of nowhere and goes against everything we've seen from her character so far. Even worse, I feel like the scene could have had more impact due to how she reacts to the news about Ozpin's return. If she had kept her cool, disappointed mother personality during the part where Hazel tells her how they failed, then she finally freaks out after hearing about Ozpin, it would have made her freakout seem more intense. She would only lose her cool when she finds out about Oz, and it would have made perfect sense coming off the heels of her backstory episode. Salem is the only villain to have their whole history and motivations told to the audience. Episode 3 of Volume 6 was a massive 30-minute long explanation into Ozpin and Salem's past, and what brought them to where they are now. And I love it. Not only do I appreciate seeing the history of our antagonist, but I also find the story fits into the aesthetic of RWBY well. RWBY has themes of stories and fairy tales, and Salem's more simple backstory feels like an actual fairy tale. I don't question why they fell in love so quickly or how she found the lands of the gods. It's a fairy tale. It's a simple story to tell a larger moral, and it works. It's nice finally knowing what the actual reason for our girls going on this adventure is. They're not just nebulously following Crow and Oz, now they know the story, and they understand the motivations behind their main adversary. But despite that great setup for our villain, the downside is we still don't really know what her actual goal is. The God of Light says that if the 4 relics are brought together, it'll bring him and the God of Darkness back to the world, where they will then judge humanity. If humanity can unite, then they will grant magic back to the people. If not, then the world will be destroyed. And I have no idea what Salem wants with either of that. I assume she doesn't want regular people to have magic again. Her magic makes people perceive her as a god, and she adores being in power. Does she want the gods to destroy the world so she can finally die? Is there some other alternative motive she has planned by using the relic's different abilities? I don't know. Salem hasn't gone into detail about it, so it's hard to understand what her actions in the current time mean when we don't really know for sure what her ultimate goal is. Speaking of which, she doesn't seem very good at actually making plans anyway. Tyrion failed at his mission. Hazel failed at his mission. Cinder technically succeeded, but she walked away completely crippled. Why not deploy your followers more tactfully? Cinder spent about a year infiltrating Bacon Academy. What was Tyrion and Hazel doing that whole time? Why not divide the 4 of your forces and slowly collapse the 4 schools, like how Cinder did? At the start of Volume 6, why not split your remaining forces into 2 teams? Send Tyrion and Watts to Atlas, and Hazel and the kids to Vacuo. If she doesn't send someone out on a mission, she just has them waste time sitting around her mansion. Why? Why isn't she utilizing her whole followers to actually get the relics faster? And another thing, why is Cinder the only girl? Having the maidens, or at least their powers, plays a major role in getting the relics. And men cannot be maidens. Why doesn't Salem have more female followers if this is so important? Why risk having Cinder try to obtain all the maiden powers? Can one person even be multiple maidens? The only other options Salem has are Emerald and maybe Neo now that she's teamed up with Cinder, but they're only around because Cinder recruited them. Is that why it's taken Salem so long to get started with trying to collect the relics? She just sucks at befriending girls. So, watching these videos, you probably noticed I have a lot of problems with most of our villainous cast. However, there is one more villain I want to talk about that's been written really, really well. The creatures of Grimm are a fantastic force of evil our heroes need to fight against. The writers can't accidentally give them confusing motives, they don't need a detailed backstory, they're just the forces of evil. They kill people, and the heroes need to stop them whenever they can. I feel like every time the heroes have a big confrontation with a Grimm, it's always a much more engaging and better written than when the heroes have a fight against any of our villains. And I feel like that's probably because it's easier to write for the Grimm. Let's compare the creatures of Grimm with one of our villains. How about Emerald? First, when in a fight, we have to think about size. If Yang is fighting Emerald, it'll be different compared to fighting Hazel. The size difference plays a major role, and the Grimm share this trait, but to a much larger degree. We've seen Nevermore come in both small and large. The Grimm always offer an interesting challenge due to how massive they can be. Next, we have to think about abilities. The Grimm never really have any other abilities than Bite or Scratch. Some can fly, some can shoot projectiles. Really, the most unique ability we've seen by the Grimm is the Apathy's effect on people. However, for the most part, all you need to worry about with the Grimm are the aforementioned biting and scratching. Emerald, on the other hand, has a ton of abilities. She's shown to be very acrobatic. She has her sickles with the chains attached to them. Not only can they slice, but they can be wrapped around an opponent and pull them in another direction. Her weapon also has guns and can fire bullets. It's not confirmed how long of a range her guns are, but the farthest we've seen her fire at someone was during the attack on Amber. I'm going to guess that Emerald was about 20 feet away at that point. And of course, Emerald has her semblance. She seems to have to be relatively stationary in order to use her semblance, but its power of manipulating your mind has limitless potential. And all these crazy cool abilities is Emerald's biggest detriment. If we see her fight and she doesn't use one of her abilities when it would have benefited her in the moment, it's annoying. If she uses her abilities and it's limited or ineffective due for no reason other than moving the scene forward, then it's aggravating. You can't underutilize the Grimm's abilities because their pool of skills is much easier to manage, and leads to stronger fight choreography in the long run. Every time our heroes need to face off against a human combatant, the writers need to juggle a huge amount of skills each player has. That's why a lot of characters don't use their semblances. It's easier for the writers to keep track of. That's why in recent volumes a lot of fighters don't have weapons anymore. It's just easier to choreograph. Those abilities don't even include other skills characters have. Torchwick's piloting skills, Tyrion's stinger, and Cinder's maiden powers are all other attributes the writers need to try to juggle when writing a fight scene. But the biggest advantage the Grimm have over the human characters, Grimm can't talk. Grimm don't have thoughts or feelings. They're just mindless monsters who want to destroy. We don't need to question the Grimm's motives, they're just monsters. But more importantly, the heroes don't need to question the Grimm's motives. RWBY has the tendency to try to find a peaceful situation to end a fight, and that always results in a conversation with her. And while it's not a terrible aspect for her character, it does get very annoying when we constantly have to stop so RWBY can question the villains. Encounters with the Grimm always lead to stronger character moments for our heroes. We don't need to waste time having RWBY question someone's motives, we can just dive right into fighting and having them figure out how to beat it. But there is one problem with the Grimm. The kids keep fighting bigger and badder monsters, so every time they fight our villains, I never take the fight seriously. The heroes can handle a giant Nevermore. I don't see how a couple of angsty teenagers could pose a threat. There's also the problem of the Grimm's sizes. Before the kids had even formed Team RWBY, they killed 3 Ursa, a King Taijutsu, a Deathstalker, and a giant Nevermore. That's not even including the horde of Beowulfs RWBY fought in the Red trailer. The heroes have never struggled against a Grimm. In every encounter they have had throughout the whole show, they have never lost a fight to the Grimm. They've run away from the Grimm, but the most serious damage our heroes have ever suffered from the Grimm was that bite that broke Yang's aura in her character short, and she still killed it afterwards. While the Grimm usually leads to fight scenes that have fun choreography and help drive our characters to meaningful interactions with each other, they don't really feel like a threat. I'm never worried a Grimm fight will result in anything serious, seeing as how our heroes constantly plow through hordes of them. Like, in Volume 3, a Nevermore attacks the stadium, but I wasn't ever worried about that encounter. Not only did Team RWBY kill one during orientation, Coco was able to kill one on her own. A stadium full of students trained to kill these things are going to be just fine. And so, to try to remedy this, they keep coming up with new, big, scary Grimm for the kids to fight. It's a giant Nevermore. Now fight a horde of monsters. Now fight a giant sea dragon. Now fight a giant killer bee. Now fight a giant leviathan. They keep making the Grimm bigger and scarier, but the downside is the kids just keep beating them easily. Now that they've killed a giant sea monster, I really won't be able to take an encounter with a pack of dinky little Beowulfs seriously. Even worse, RWBY is finally learning to make her silver eyes work. Killing the apathy was a good step in the right direction, but rather than have her slowly build up and kill progressively harder baddies, like leveling up in an RPG, they just skip ahead to the final boss and have her paralyze the biggest Grimm we've ever seen in the show. Taken the enemy with the best setup for exciting fight scenes and instantly gave RWBY the ability to end it all instantly. Unbelievable. So, these videos are for a purpose. I don't want to just complain about RWBY's villains, because the fact is, the villains are my favorite characters. From the very beginning of the show, I was always much happier seeing our antagonists appear on screen than when we were spending time with our heroes. So I did this series of videos to address the problems because I want with all my heart to see the villains get the writing they deserve. The show's not over yet, so we have time to try to fix some of these problems. True, the problems of the past can't be fixed at this point, but we can start looking towards a better future for the series. Definitely, the biggest thing the writer should do to start fixing the villains is give them a relationship with the heroes. Our heroes and villains are weirdly separated from each other. They don't know or care about one another. Hell, half of them don't even know about each other's existence. Like, would Weiss, Blake, or Yang even, realize Tyrion was gonna be a threat for them? Does Watts even know what any of them look like? Does Cinder even know any of their names besides RWBY? Any sort of relationship between the protagonist and antagonists is weirdly one-sided. Cinder hates RWBY. RWBY doesn't really seem to care. Jean hates Cinder. Cinder doesn't remember who he is. The villains never focus on what the heroes are up to unless it's a part of Cinder's revenge plan on RWBY, and that also just goes nowhere. And the heroes never even once talk about the villains. There's never a discussion of how they can move forward to specifically stop the villains. There's never a discussion of what the heroes are doing and how we can stop them. Both parties only ever talk about the goal of getting relics, but they never consider the actual combatants who are opposing them. Hell, Team RWBY spends more time discussing how Ozpin's a bad dude than the actual people who are actively trying to kill them. The villains and heroes need some sort of relationship with each other to help push both the characters and the plot forward. The best way to do this is to give them opposing ideals, which is actually something they've done well before in the show. RWBY's relationship with Torchic was the best they've had between a hero and a villain. They knew each other, they were actively thinking of each other and trying to stop one another. Most importantly, they had opposite ideals about the world. RWBY is very much an optimist. She wants to do good and always do the right thing. She doesn't let herself become jaded because of how shitty the world around her gets. Torchic, on the other hand, is a pessimist. He sees the world as a cruel, violent place, and the only way to live in it is to be just as cruel and violent back. His last words reveal how defeated he truly felt. Their rivalry led to natural conflict and gave them something to actually discuss whenever they stopped the combat to talk. Their conversations led to a natural discourse between them. Unfortunately, with Torchic's death, we've lost this aspect of a natural rivalry for all of our characters, and it's something that's been kind of missing for the other girls anyways. RWBY has yet to have a rivalry with any character since Torchic's death. That's because she doesn't ever do anything. Blake has sort of had a rivalry with Adam, but unfortunately it was woefully absent for the first 2.5 volumes. Then, when he was there to facilitate their opposing viewpoints, all it did was distract Blake from the real plot of the show. And Weiss and Yang have never had anything even close to a relationship with an antagonist. The most the two have ever had was their own personal problems with their own family members. Notice how when Cinder stops to taunt Jean during the attack on Haven, they don't have anything to say. The dialogue during that whole encounter lacks any nuance because these characters have nothing to talk about. So whenever the action stops for the characters to talk to each other, the conversation falls flat because of this. But the writers could definitely do something to help give these characters natural opposing viewpoints of the world. Remember, Team RWBY and Team Witch both have 4 members. It's pretty easy to find things that each team member could have opposing opinions on. Let's start with Ruby and Cinder. Cinder already hates RWBY for what she did to her at Beacon. That's good building blocks for the two to have a better antagonist-protagonist relationship. Give RWBY something to resent Cinder for. Maybe she can blame her for the deaths of Pyrrha and Penny. Maybe she just wants to stop Cinder because she's doing things for the forces of evil. Anything that will give RWBY a reason to want to actively fight Cinder and want to stop her. Next is Weiss and Watts. Both are upper crusts from Atlas. While we don't know too much on Watts, we could use what we know about Weiss to help come up with something for this example. Weiss wants to make a better name for the Schnee Dust Company. She wants to change people's opinions on the rich population of Atlas. Maybe Watts wants to get back in a position of being in the 1%, get rid of his disgraced status and become wealthy. Weiss wants to get away from it, Watts wants to get back in. Blake could have something with Tyrion. Blake still wants equality for the Faunus. What if Tyrion kind of undermined her fight for Faunus rights? What if he didn't really think there was much of a problem, and her efforts were pointless? No one seems to discriminate against him in Salem's forces. What if his idea was that all Faunus could find equality if they just became loyal to Salem? And Blake going against that, and trying to find equality in a different way, is blasphemous. That could lead to a fun, interesting dynamic between them. Finally, there's Yang and Hazel. They're both berserkers. What if they had opposing opinions on how to use their anger to fuel their attack power? Yang has just learned to try to control her anger when using her semblance, yet she still has a tendency to blow up during normal conversations. Hazel is the opposite, controlling his anger in casual moments but lets it get the better of him in combat. This could be the starting of something between them that could escalate into a rivalry. Then, importantly, after setting up these relationships, the characters need to actually actively be thinking about it. They can't just be mad and have different ideals. They need to be thinking, I need to stop them. They need to discuss these things with each other. These are just some basic ideas, and I'm sure you could find some ways to incorporate the other villains and heroes into rivalry relationships, but the point is, something needs to change. The writers need to work on fixing the villains, both their individual characters and the antagonist's impact on the plot and the heroes' struggle. Because, like I said, I love these characters. They're my favorites. They always have been. I want to see them grow and become something truly worth remembering. Something to be feared. Something our protagonists need to be worried about and strive to stop. I don't want to look at these characters and think, what is it that makes RWBY's villains so bad? I want to be thinking, what makes RWBY's villains so good at being bad? Alrighty, I hope you liked that video. Finally, the villain series is over. I'm sure I'll talk about the villains again sometime because I really do love them so much and I spent a lot of time thinking about them. That's why I wanted to do this. I have a Patreon. There's links everywhere, description up here, wherever you can find it. I would love and appreciate any and all support. $1, $7, it doesn't matter. Anything helps and I would really love it and you would be an awesome person if you did that. And I want to hear your opinions on this video. If you want to go back, think about the rest of the villains too, go for it. There's a lot of villains to go over. What are your opinions on Salem? She's kind of hard to talk about because she doesn't really do a whole lot. Hoping she gets really good screen time during Volume 7, but you know what? There's a lot of things I hope for Volume 7, and Salem is nearly close to the top of that list, but we'll see. I'd love to hear all your opinions. Please do me a favor, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.